Hey guys, tonight we slip into something far more ancient than the buzzing of your phone screen or the hum of your fridge. Tonight we float down the Mekong River, one of the world's great waterways winding through mountains, jungles and delta plains, and we trace the story of rice. Yes, rice. The food you stir-fry, drown in curry, or maybe just ignore at the bottom of your takeout box. Here, along the Mekong, rice was never background filler. It was everything life-death offering and sometimes surprisingly good pillow stuffing. And if you think you can stay awake for 2 whole hours of rice history, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you are right now and what time it is. Maybe you're lying in bed in Hanoi at midnight. Maybe you're sneaking in a nap break in California at 3 p.m. Either way, you and I are about to drift together into forgotten fields. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You picture the delta at dawn, mist rising off still water, the surface glowing faintly gold as the sun edges up behind palms. The river here is a slow giant heavy with silt, spilling into thousands of streams that braid across the lowlands. It is here thousands of years ago that people first looked at wild grasses growing in marshy pools and thought, what if we convince this stuff to stick around? The mainstream fact rice cultivation along the Mekong Delta dates back at least 2 millennia, with archaeological evidence suggesting domesticated varieties were planted in Vietnam as early as the 1st millennium BCE. These early farmers cleared patches of marsh, channeling river water into simple plots that trapped the fertile silt. Rice became a renewable miracle, a plant that grew taller with flooding, bending, but rarely breaking. The quirky tidbit: ancient villagers are believed to have sung to their seedlings. In some places they whispered encouragement as they pressed seeds into muddy ground. If you've ever talked kindly to your houseplant, congratulations, you've got something in common with Bronze Age farmers of the Mekong Delta. Historians still argue whether rice cultivation spread into this region from China's Yangtze Basin or whether Southeast Asia had its own domestication centers. Some evidence suggests the wild rice, Oryza rufipogon, was independently nurtured into edible form by farmers right here, meaning your bowl of sticky rice could have roots not just imported from the north, but born of local ingenuity. You walk along a ridge of packed mud, your feet squelching as frogs leap ahead of you into the shallows. The smell of wet earth mixes with the faint sweetness of sprouting rice, a smell as subtle as green tea. Farmers squat at the water's edge, guiding buffalo through the muck. The animals grunt, half-buried their hides, shining with mud. A boy runs behind them, laughing, bare feet, splashing, probably having more fun than the buffalo. The paddies stretch out like a giant mirror, reflecting sky and palm trees in broken shards. Each square is bordered by dikes, so thin you wonder how people walk them without tumbling into the muck. And yet they do, balancing baskets of seed, adjusting water levels by lifting little bamboo gates, their movements steady and calm. You picture a grandmother bent low, scattering handfuls of soaked grain into water that laps against her knees. The seeds spiral downward, invisible beneath the cloudy water. Weeks later, those seeds push up slender blades green as emerald, transforming the flat world into a waving carpet. You feel how much patience is required. Months pass with nothing but tending, mending dikes, clearing weeds, hoping the river brings just enough water, not too much, not too little. One sudden flood, and the work of a year washes away. One drought, and the field becomes a cracked wasteland. No wonder entire belief systems grew around the spirit of rice. It was both fragile and mighty, like a god disguised as a blade of grass. Even at night, the paddies never sleep. You hear crickets, frogs, and the drip of water from bamboo sluices. Somewhere, a family sits around a fire, their pots steaming with the first harvest. The grains are smaller than modern varieties, rougher, less predictable, but in every handful lies survival. Each bowl warms bellies, seals marriages, and ensures another season. The first dawns of rice along the Mekong were not glamorous. They were muddy, monotonous, backbreaking. Yet they held a kind of quiet glory, an early partnership between people and plant that would ripple through centuries, shaping empires, rituals, and lullabies. And so as you watch the mist dissolve over those first fields, your breath slows. You can almost feel the weight of the wooden seed basket in your hands, the cool slap of water against your legs. The world narrows to the rhythm of scattering grain, the patience of waiting, and the slow miracle of green rising from mud. You step away from the misty delta and let the river pull you upstream toward the older currents of memory, back into a time before iron tools and carefully laid dikes. The Mekong was already ancient, then already carving valleys and feeding wetlands long before anyone thought of coaxing grain from water. You picture wild rice growing in scattered pools, tangled stems bending beneath birds that swoop down for seeds. Imagine early gatherers wading through marshes, their baskets tied to their backs, plucking stalks and shaking grain into woven trays. Each handful was precious but fragile, half of it slipping away to the mud or devoured by the next passing duck. The mainstream fact here is simple. The earliest evidence of rice gathering in mainland Southeast Asia suggests communities were exploiting wild stands of Oryza rufipogon long before full domestication, perhaps as far back as 2000 BCE. These weren't farms, yet they were experiments in timing, patience, and the sheer gamble of depending on nature's moods. A quirky detail: those early gatherers sometimes roasted rice in clay-lined pits, not to eat it right away, but to make it easier to store. Charred husks hardened by fire could sit for months without rotting. Somewhere between survival and accident, people discovered a kind of prehistoric granola. Historians still argue whether the drive to domesticate rice began here or was borrowed from northern neighbors in the Yangtze Basin, where rice farming was already sophisticated. Some say seeds traveled downriver with migrants, while others insist farmers here shaped their own destiny, nudging local rice into forms that bent more easily to human control. The debate hangs like mist over a marsh, present, visible, yet never settling. You kneel in the reeds beside a hunter-gatherer family. They have no paddies, yet no buffalo, no bronze sickles. They have baskets woven from river reeds, bone-tipped digging sticks, and the instinct to notice when the water birds grow restless. That means seeds are ripening. Children splash about scattering ducks while elders scold them and carefully sweep their hands across heavy grain heads. Each motion is both routine and ritual. The sound is hushed, almost reverent. The rustle of stalks, the patter of falling seeds, the occasional cough or laugh breaking the rhythm. You realize that at this stage, rice is still a gift, not a guarantee. No one can be certain how much will be gathered, whether the baskets will be full or only half. Every evening meal feels like the result of a negotiation with the marsh spirits. There is a certain humor in imagining someone from 2025 trying to join this band of gatherers, you in your sneakers, swatting mosquitoes, fumbling to balance a basket while complaining about how your smartwatch got muddy. Meanwhile, a grandmother with nothing but calloused hands and a quiet grin doubles your haul without breaking a sweat. Some lessons never change. Nature favors patience, not gadgets. You follow them back to a camp, a cluster of thatched shelters perched on slightly higher ground, safe from floods but close to the wetland edge. Smoke curls from a fire where someone roasts fish wrapped in leaves. In another pit, rice husks are burning, sending up sparks that drift into the night. A dog sniffs around, hopeful for scraps. Children chew, grains half-cooked their mouths, sticky with starch, while elders carefully dry seeds on mats, storing them in clay jars, sealed with mud. The night deepens, but the river does not rest. You hear its constant gurgle, its low song through reeds. For these people, the river is not just a source of food, it is the world's spine. Fish, rice clay, reeds, even the rhythm of seasons, everything flows from it. Without the river there is no camp, no jars, no future. You notice something important. Even without permanent fields, these early families are already altering the land. Seeds spill where they walk. Grains dropped near camp sprout into denser stands. Over years, whether by chance or by quiet design, wild rice begins to grow closer to human hands. A subtle partnership is forming, invisible yet inevitable. It is almost funny to imagine that the path to empire, religion, and trade routes starts with someone accidentally spilling a basket. Perhaps civilization owes itself to clumsiness. Maybe you should drop your phone more often. Who knows what breakthroughs would sprout from that? Still, there is a seriousness here. Every grain matters. Each jar stored against lean months is insurance against storm sickness, or simply bad luck. Each seed that survives becomes not just food, but a chance at continuity. You feel it in the stillness of the campfire, in the way everyone leans close to the flames, hands stretched out, eyes heavy. There is no grandeur, no sweeping epic, only the steady heartbeat of survival. And as you sit with them, lulled by crackling fire and river murmur, you sense how this gathering, fragile as it is, will eventually swell into fields that stretch for miles. Tonight, though, it is only the beginning, tiny sparks in jars, embers that will one day light whole kingdoms. You drift farther along the current into a time when small camps of reed hut families begin to trade baskets for something sturdier, something that whispers of permanence. The river is still the same, muddy, swollen in wet season, sulking in dry, but human footprints are changing it. You walk through a clearing where the marsh has been half drained, the ground leveled by hand, and shallow dikes guide trickles of water into a rectangle that almost looks intentional. Someone has looked at a swamp and thought, what if this water belonged to us? The mainstream fact here is that by around 1500–1000 BCE, early agricultural communities in mainland Southeast Asia were experimenting with wet rice cultivation, creating small paddies with wooden tools and coaxing crops through controlled flooding. These were not yet the grand terraced fields you see in tourist brochures. They were modest, patchy squares stitched together by labor and faith. A quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists found evidence that early farmers tucked charms, small carved stones, shells, even animal teeth into the corners of their fields, as if to bribe unseen spirits into making the rice grow tall. It's basically the prehistoric equivalent of burying a lucky coin under your doormat. Only instead of hoping for good test scores, you're praying not to starve. Historians still argue whether these wet field experiments were purely local inventions or whether farmers borrowed techniques from migrants moving south out of China. Was it knowledge trickling down like water through dikes, or a parallel burst of ingenuity born of necessity? No one can say for certain, though either version suggests that humans, wherever they stood, had the same stubborn idea: bend water to your will, and the plants will follow. You squat beside one such paddy, toes sinking into mud. The air is warm, thick with the buzz of insects. Farmers wade waist-deep, planting seedlings in neat lines, their backs curved like question marks. The rhythm is hypnotic: press, seedling, step, each motion a vow to tomorrow. It looks grueling, and it is. Your modern gym routine would fold in shame before this marathon of squats and mud stomping. But there's a kind of peace in repetition. The farmers gossip, tease one another, even hum tuneless songs as their hands sink into muck. Children chase frogs at the edges, laughing until someone yells that they're trampling seedlings. The water smells faintly sweet, like grass mixed with clay. Dragonflies dart low. Somewhere, a water buffalo snorts and flicks its tail, tied to a stake until its turn comes to plow the field. That animal is the quiet hero of this whole arrangement. Without its strength dragging wooden plows through soggy ground, no one could keep pace with the river's moods. You watch as a young man guides one clumsy, slipping but determined, while an elder calls out instructions, half exasperated, half proud. At night, these families retreat to stilt houses raised above floodplain mud. Smoke curls from clay hearths where rice porridge simmers, bubbling thick and bland but filling. Dogs curl under ladders, chickens roost on beams. In the dim light, elders retell stories how rice was a gift from sky spirits, how once the grains were as large as melons, until careless humans squandered the gift, shrinking them forever. You wonder if that tale was born as an explanation for why dinner never seems big enough. There's a practical charm in these stories, though they remind everyone not to waste food, not to take the fragile grain for granted. In truth, scarcity is never far. One bad flood, one pest outbreak, and jars run empty. Farmers hedge their bets by planting small patches of millet or taro nearby, but rice is already creeping into the role of center stage, the crop that shapes schedules, rituals, and relationships. It's almost funny to picture how much of your own modern schedule still revolves around rice. Sushi nights, curry bowls, fried rice takeout. You're eating the same stubborn grass these people coaxed from swamps 3,000 years ago. The packaging might have changed, but the plant hasn't. Somewhere those old charms buried in fields probably worked better than anyone realized. You listen to the chorus of frogs outside rising like applause. The river shifts in the dark, carrying silt, feeding the paddies, feeding the families. Here, for the first time, rice is not just gathered, but grown, shaped into a steady rhythm. Morning planting, evening harvest, jars, filled jars, emptied. It is no longer only a gift, it is now a pact between people and landscape, between sweat and soil. And as you lie back in the stilt house, lulled by the creak of bamboo poles and the hum of crickets, you sense how fragile yet how inevitable this pact will become. The river may rage or shrink, but people will not stop bending it toward the paddies. A soft revolution is underway, hidden in mud and seedlings, and it will ripple out into empires and dynasties yet unborn. You follow the current downstream, slipping into centuries when the rhythm of rice no longer belongs to isolated hamlets, but to whole villages that link together in a chain of muddy cooperation. You step into one such village where the dawn is already alive, the thump of mortars pounding grain, the splash of buckets lifting water, the lowing of buffalo waiting for their turn in the fields. Everything hums like a single organism, the village itself, a body, and rice, its heartbeat. The mainstream fact here is that by the first millennium BCE, larger communities along the Mekong and its tributaries were organizing collective irrigation systems. Earthen embankments, hand-cut canals, and shared water schedules allowed rice to be grown on a larger scale. This marked the leap from subsistence to surplus, a transformation that nudged villages toward hierarchy, trade, and eventually kingdoms. A quirky tidbit: archaeologists uncovered remnants of old bamboo water wheels, the kind that squeaked and spun endlessly, scooping river water into troughs. Imagine trying to nap while that thing groaned all night outside your hut. Functional, yes. Peaceful, not so much. Still, it was a genius hack, renewable energy before hashtags. Historians still argue whether these irrigation feats were purely grassroots cooperation or the earliest evidence of centralized authority, proto-kings flexing their power by deciding who got water first. Did villagers truly work together as equals, or did some ambitious elder collect voluntary offerings that looked suspiciously like taxes? The mud has kept its secrets and the debate lingers. You crouch by one of these canals, its water brown but shimmering in the sun. Children lean over, dropping leaves to see them drift, while an old woman wades in with a net, hoping to snag dinner in the form of tiny silver fish. The canal is not just plumbing for rice, it's life support for the whole menu. Fish, snails, edible weeds, even drinking water in leaner times. It blurs the line between agriculture and aquaculture in a way that feels surprisingly modern. The fields stretch wider now, their grids forming a patchwork quilt stitched across the valley. You walk their edges and notice how the soil feels firmer, shaped by years of human insistence. Instead of random swamp patches, it's deliberate rectangles each, with little berms sculpted like miniature walls. Farmers know which paddy belongs to which family. There are markers, sometimes a carved post, sometimes just memory. Arguments erupt, of course, because no one forgets which muddy square is theirs. You chuckle at the thought HOA drama existed long before suburban lawns. When harvest comes, the village changes tempo. Everyone descends on the field's hands, flashing as they cut panicles of rice with small sickles. The air smells sharp green, almost sweet like hay, spiced with humidity. Piles grow, laughter echoes, and arguments get set aside, at least until the storage jars are counted. By moonlight, the rice is dried, pounded, and stored in bamboo bins lined with ash to deter insects. The crackling fires nearby ward off both pests and ghosts because, yes, even the dead supposedly want their share. At the communal granary, elders weigh and measure the contribution of each household. You see, it's not purely bookkeeping, it's also a ritual of fairness, a way to ensure the unlucky family whose field got flooded doesn't starve. Rice becomes not only food, but social glue. Share too little and your reputation sours. Share too much and you might end up the talk of matchmaking whispers. At night, the village gathers under the thatched roof of a meeting house. Torches flicker, shadows play against woven mats, and storytellers recount how the rice spirit lives in every grain. To spill rice carelessly is to insult her. Some say she takes the form of a pale woman who wanders paddies at dusk, checking if seedlings are treated kindly. A bit eerie, yes, but effective. Nothing motivates careful farming like the threat of a ghostly auditor. You lie back on a mat belly full of sticky rice and grilled fish. The air smells of smoke and river silt. Outside, the night chorus begins, frogs, crickets, and the occasional bark of a dog. Tomorrow, the cycle resumes as predictable as sunrise. But already, you sense how this rhythm builds power. Surplus rice means more mouths can gather, more people can specialize, more disputes can escalate into politics. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize these villages are no longer just eking out survival. They are shaping landscapes, bending rivers, and organizing labor in ways that hint at kingdoms waiting in the wings. The Mekong is quietly training its children for empire. You move further along the river where the land rises into plateaus and the air dries into something harsher. Here, rice farming changes costume. No longer the flooded paddies that mirrored the sky, but dry fields carved into uplands where water is a stingy guest. You climb a slope and find farmers bent over rows of hardy varieties grains that shrug off drought and cling to rocky soil. These are the mountain rices, the stubborn cousins of their watery kin. The mainstream fact, archaeological and linguistic evidence shows that upland rice cultivation spread widely among Austroasiatic and Thai-speaking groups who migrated through the Mekong basin. Their rice was different, often shorter in stalk, faster in growth, and tolerant of poorer soils. Instead of elaborate irrigation, they relied on rainfall and shifting cultivation. Burn a patch of forest plant for a few years, then move on. It was both sustainable and destructive, depending on who's telling the story. A quirky tidbit. Some of these farmers carried rice seed in tiny bamboo tubes tied to their belts, ready to plant whenever they found a new clearing. Imagine a fanny pack, but filled with carbs instead of granola bars. Convenient, yes, but probably not a fashion statement. Historians still argue whether shifting cultivation was a symptom of necessity, forests, too dense, soils too poor, or whether it was a deliberate cultural choice, a rhythm of mobility that gave freedom from permanent rulers. After all, if you can simply pack up your rice seeds and walk away, no chief or king can easily tax you. Farming in this sense doubled as political resistance. You wander through such a hillside clearing. The air smells of ash, and the ground crunches beneath your feet where stumps poke through. Women carry baskets strapped to their foreheads filled with seedlings ready for planting. They jab holes into the soil with sharpened sticks, drop in a few grains, and pat the earth shut. It's efficient in its simplicity, and it leaves just enough time to chase chickens before dusk. Life here feels more scattered than in the lowland paddies. Villages are smaller houses perching like wooden birds on stilts along the ridge. Smoke curls lazily from hearths, and dogs bark at anything that moves, including you apparently. The rhythm is less about canals and cooperation, more about family labor and seasonal movement. You picture it as a dance fields, planted fields, abandoned forests reclaiming what humans briefly borrowed. In one home, you sit with a family over a meal of roasted tubers, rice steamed in bamboo, and a spicy fish paste that nearly sends you coughing into the night. They laugh kindly at your watery eyes, offering a gourd of rice beer that makes everything suddenly feel like a good idea. You notice how food and drink are always tied to rice here, fermented, steamed, pounded, or boiled. Even the gods, they say, prefer their offerings wrapped in banana leaves with sticky grains inside. The resilience of upland rice is impressive. Some varieties grow in just 3 months, others resist pests better than their lowland cousins. But the trade-off is yield less grain per acre, more uncertainty. You can almost hear the tension in villagers' stories, years of plenty, followed by years when baskets echo hollow. Yet the culture that springs from this struggle is rich. Festivals, marking planting and harvest songs, chanted to encourage seedlings, charms tied to the first stalk cut. One elder tells you about a rice spirit who hates noise in the field. If you sing too loudly, she warns the rice will grow shy and hide. You nod politely, though you can't help imagining rice plants blushing and ducking their heads like awkward teenagers. Still, the belief shapes behavior. Farmers tread softly, treating the field with reverence. Religion doubles as agricultural psychology. As dusk falls, the mountains glow purple and the smell of wood smoke thickens. A boy releases a kite made of palm leaves, letting it whistle in the breeze over the drying rice. You realize that here, rice is more than food. It is identity, defiance, and adaptation, all woven into one. These varieties, tough, lean, stubborn, mirror the people who grow them. You lean back on a woven mat belly warm with fermented rice beer and listen to the forest's night chorus, cicadas, owls, and distant gibbons calling like someone practicing bad opera. The air cools quickly, and you wrap yourself in a blanket, feeling the day's stories settle like husks in a basket. Sleep comes easier here, but you sense the precariousness, life balanced on shifting soil, never certain when the rain will bless or betray. You wake to a golden haze rising over the lowlands where the Mekong flattens into wide valleys. This is the realm of wet rice agriculture, the shining symbol of stability and surplus. You walk across levees so narrow you almost fall into the water, dragonflies darting at your ankles. Here, rice fields gleam like mirrors, carefully flooded to the perfect depth. The work is endless, but the yields are generous. The mainstream wet rice systems in the Mekong Delta and surrounding plains allowed dense populations to flourish, feeding kingdoms like Funan, Chenla, and later the Khmer Empire. Controlled water meant controlled harvests, and with it came the power to build temples and cities. A single acre of irrigated rice could feed a family for months, which in medieval math also meant you had enough extra grain for tax collectors to sniff around. Quirky tidbit. Farmers sometimes released ducks into the paddies to eat insects and weeds. A kind of medieval pest control squad waddling about on webbed feet. Ducks enjoyed the buffet, farmers enjoyed fewer pests, and everyone ignored the fact that ducks also pooped directly into the water. You tell yourself it was natural fertilizer and move on. Historians still argue whether these massive irrigation systems were grassroots innovations by farmers who tinkered with canals for centuries, or whether they were top-down projects enforced by kings. The debate isn't just academic, it shapes how we imagine power. Was rice a tool of collective genius, or was it another brick in the wall of empire building? Either way, you find yourself splashing through the consequences. You kneel beside a farmer planting seedlings by hand. She grips a clump of young rice like a bouquet and pushes them rhythmically into the mud. Each movement is quick, efficient, hypnotic. Your back aches just watching her. She smiles politely, maybe wondering why you're loitering barefoot in her office. Villages here are sturdier, clustered close to canals that double as transport routes. You pass boats, carved from single logs piled high with sheaves of rice. Children splash in the shallows, shrieking at water buffalo, lumbering in for a bath. The animals are indispensable, ploughing the fields, hauling loads, and sometimes just standing around looking vaguely judgmental. You wonder if the buffalo judge you personally, or if that's just their default expression. Harvest season transforms the landscape. Fields turn gold, scythes sweep low, and laughter carries over the water. Grain is stacked into conical piles, drying beneath the sun. At night, you sit among villagers, pounding rice in large mortars, the rhythm steady and communal. Sparks from the hearth leap into the dark while someone plucks a two-string fiddle, filling the air with melancholy notes. There's a ritualistic side to it all. Farmers leave the first handful of harvested rice in the field, a symbolic gift to May Fossop, the rice mother spirit. She's imagined as a gentle woman draped in golden silk, watching over every grain. Without her blessing, no harvest feels secure. You whisper a thank you too, just in case. No need to upset the divine landlord. The ingenuity of irrigation fascinates you. Canals stretch like veins across the plain, feeding paddies and draining floods. Dikes rise high, carved by hand with simple tools. In some places, farmers built small reservoirs barrages to trap monsoon water for leaner months. The engineering is impressive, even if it meant endless labor. You picture centuries of backs bent to dig these watery highways, the earth itself reshaped to cradle rice. Yet water is fickle. Too much, and the fields drown. Too little, and seedlings shrivel. You can feel the tension, a system that seems stable, but always teeters on disaster. One ill-timed monsoon could undo a year of toil. Farmers hedge their bets, planting both wet and dry varieties, storing what they can, praying the river behaves. As twilight settles, fireflies flicker over the paddies, tiny lanterns bobbing on the humid air. You hear frogs croak, their voices rising like a sloppy choir. Somewhere a bamboo flute sighs in the distance, a tune so soft you nearly mistake it for your own heartbeat. You realize that in these wetlands, rice is not just food, it is the skeleton of society, the reason for villages, temples, kings, and wars. Every grain is a unit of power, every field is a ledger entry. You look at the shimmering water around you and think, this is both dinner and destiny floating side by side. Morning mist clings to your arms as you climb higher, the air sharpening with each step. Terraced paddies unfurl along the hillsides, carved like giant staircases for the gods. You pause to take in the geometry, neat green bands, hugging mountainsides, their mirrored waters catching the clouds. Each terrace feels both impossibly fragile and stubbornly eternal, clinging to steep slopes where flatland rice could never dream of growing. Mainstream fact. Highland rice terraces are scattered throughout the Mekong watershed, from northern Laos to Vietnam's uplands. Generations of farmers carved them painstakingly with stone tools, a slow-motion feat of engineering that reshaped entire mountains. Terraces control erosion, conserve water, and allow rice cultivation in otherwise hostile landscapes. Without them, highland communities might never have supported permanent villages. Quirky tidbit: some terraces doubled as amphitheaters for local festivals. After planting, seasoned villagers gathered on the steps, drumming, chanting, and drinking rice beer, while echoes bounced off the valley walls. Imagine an open-air concert, except the seating is knee-deep in mud and your neighbor is a buffalo. Historians still argue whether terrace farming spread primarily through migration pioneering groups teaching others, or whether it emerged independently in multiple regions as a logical response to geography. The terraces themselves stay quiet on the matter, but you can almost feel their weighty silence, asking, does it really matter we're still here? You follow a winding footpath into a small hamlet tucked among bamboo groves. The houses are stilted wooden with thatched roofs. Smoke curls lazily from hearths, scented with sticky rice steaming inside bamboo tubes. A woman greets you with a grin and offers you one warm fragrant with just a hint of burnt bamboo. You bite into it, and for a moment you forget the centuries between you and her world. Up here, rice is more than calories, it's memory. Families preserve heirloom varieties, each with its own taste and personality. Some grow short, plump grains for sticky rice feasts. Others stretch long and aromatic, reserved for ritual offerings. The names alone sound like poetry: fragrant cloud, red jewel, moon, shadow. Every handful tells a lineage, a whispered ancestry in starch and steam. The planting is rhythmic, communal. Whole villages gather to help each family in turn. Elders chant to invite mountain spirits to bless the seedlings. Children splash barefoot, pretending to plant, but mostly flinging mud at each other. You're tempted to join until you remember your balance is questionable at best. One wrong step and you're face first in the sacred dinner. During harvest, the scene shifts. Sickles slice golden stalks, sheaves are bundled and carried up narrow paths. The climb itself is exhausting. You wheeze just carrying yourself, but farmers shoulder 30 kilos without a flinch. At night, they spread mats, pound rice by torchlight, and tell stories of trickster spirits who hide in the terraces. Water is the lifeblood here. Channels snake down from mountain springs guided with bamboo pipes and carved gullies. A broken sluice can ruin a neighbor's field, so communities share strict rules about who diverts water when. Disputes are common. So are rituals meant to soothe them. A shaman might sprinkle rice grains into the headwaters, asking the stream to stay generous. You watch the offering scatter in the current, wondering if rivers ever get tired of playing referee. Your eyes trace the valley below, where terraces stretch like scales on a sleeping dragon. The metaphor feels apt. These landscapes are alive, shaped and reshaped by countless hands. A terrace abandoned for just a few seasons crumbles into the hillside reclaimed by forest. The persistence is as much social as physical. Nightfall drapes the mountains in indigo. Fires wink on, scattered across ridges. You sit on a terrace ledge, feet dangling above the mirrored pools. Frogs and insects start their nightly chorus, while somewhere a drum thumps faintly. The villagers share rice beer in big ceramic jars, drinking through long bamboo straws. They invite you with a wave, and you sip the liquid tart and slightly fizzy. It warms your belly as the stars spread thickly above, crowding the night sky. The terraces glow under moonlight, silver steps leading up into infinity. You can almost imagine the grain itself dreaming, thousands of stalks swaying in sleep, lulled by wind, waiting for harvest. Rice here is not just sustenance, it is art, architecture, and ancestry woven into the mountain bones. And as you lean back, lulled by the view, you realize every grain has climbed a mountain, endured a season, carried a story. You breathe out slowly, the mist rising around you, and let the terraces cradle your thoughts like a green, endless staircase into sleep. You step down from the mountains and follow the pull of water, hearing it long before you see it. The Mekong spreads wide and restless, swollen with silt and life. Villages crouch along its banks, their houses balanced on stilts, like herons watching the tide. Nets drip from poles, canoes bob lazily, and rice fields stretch in flat, glimmering grids. Here in the floodplains, rice culture takes on a different rhythm, timed not by icy mountain trickles, but by the river's seasonal tantrums. Mainstream fact: the Mekong's annual floods are legendary. When the river swells in the rainy season, floodwaters spill into rice fields, depositing nutrient-rich silt that nourishes new plantings. This cycle has sustained farmers for millennia, making the floodplain one of the most productive rice-growing regions in the world. Quirky tidbit: in some areas, farmers used floating rice varieties that can grow astonishingly tall, up to 5 or 6 meters, as the water level rises. Imagine a plant stretching like an overeager kid in class, desperate not to drown. You picture fields where stalks tower above you like leafy skyscrapers, rice with a built-in snorkel. Historians still argue whether the earliest floodplain rice cultivation developed independently here or was adapted from techniques brought downstream from China. Some claim the Mekong Delta's abundance made it an experimental laboratory where unique strains thrived. Others argue it was a cultural borrowing modified to fit a wetter stage. The debate meanders like the river itself, looping but never settling. You watch the water shift colors, brown, gold, and gray, depending on the sky. Children paddle makeshift boats from banana trunks, giggling as they chase fish. Farmers plant seedlings directly into shallow floodwater, their reflections rippling like ghostly twins. A heron stalks between rows, suspicious of you, but more suspicious of the frog it's about to stab with its beak. The rhythm of life here is set by floods. Too much water and homes are swept away. Too little and rice fails. People build their calendars around it, welcoming the flood like a troublesome relative who barges in every year. You can almost hear them mutter, "He's late this time," while nervously checking the horizon. Harvest is an exercise in timing. Some fields yield grain even while half-submerged farmers balancing on bamboo rafts as they cut stalks. Bundles are floated downstream on currents tied together like drifting islands. You imagine being the unlucky person assigned to chase runaway rice sheaves, sprinting along muddy banks while yelling at the current for being rude. At night, the floodplain transforms into a mirror world. Lanterns bob along the water, fishermen casting nets that glisten like spiderwebs in the moonlight. In the distance, you hear chants from a riverside temple, monks reciting prayers that rise above the croaking frogs and the buzz of insects. Rice is not just physical sustenance, it is woven into offerings, rituals, and the cycle of gratitude to the river itself. Floodplain rice carries flavors as shifting as the land. Some grains are soft and sticky, perfect for sweets. Others are long, light, and fragrant, meant for feasts that last until dawn. Villagers swap seeds like secrets, each strain adapted to water-depth soil and family tradition. A farmer might boast that his rice cooks faster or smells sweeter, while his neighbor insists hers stays fluffy even when you forget it in the pot. You nod along politely, as though refereeing a heated sports debate. You follow a fisherman who sets traps woven from reeds. He tells you rice isn't only for people. Fish feed in the flooded paddies, too, turning fields into shared pantries. Ducks paddle in orderly lines, snatching insects before they chew through the crop. It's a whole floating buffet, the floodplain itself acting as chef-waiter and dining hall. When dawn breaks, the river releases fog that curls across the fields. The water reflects everything: upside-down palms, huts, even you, making it look as though another world lives just beneath the surface. You stand quietly, half convinced you could fall through into that shimmering reflection, a shadow version of the floodplain where the rice grows toward the sky instead of the soil. As the season changes, floodwaters withdraw like a guest, finally taking the hint to leave. Fields dry, cracked earth appears, and farmers prepare for the next cycle. Still, you can sense the memory of water lingering, etched into the soil and into every grain of rice that grew here. You taste it in a bowl of steaming rice shared with villagers, faintly earthy, faintly sweet, as if the flood itself left behind a blessing. You sit back, warmed by the meal, and lulled by the river's unhurried breath. The current drifts endlessly past, carrying secrets and silt promising to return. In the floodplains, rice lives and dies with the rhythm of water. And tonight, so do you rock to sleep by the pulse of the Mekong, listening to the hush of its eternal flood. You move south, following the Mekong as it grows wider, sluggish yet relentless, carrying the memory of glaciers, rainstorms, and mountain springs. Eventually, the river fans out into a web of channels, splitting into dozens of mouths like a giant watery braid. Here lies the Mekong Delta, a place where land and water can't decide who's in charge, so they compromise muddy earth that can sprout rice in 3 harvests a year. Mainstream fact: the Mekong Delta is often called Vietnam's Rice Bowl. For centuries, its fertile alluvial soil has produced staggering amounts of grain, feeding millions locally and supplying trade far beyond the region. In modern times, this region alone has accounted for over half of Vietnam's rice exports, a legacy rooted deep in forgotten varieties, cultivated long before tractors or chemical fertilizers arrived. Quirky tidbit farmers here once trained ducks to patrol their fields in strict little armies. By day, these feathered squads gobbled pests and weeds. By night, they fertilized the fields in their own fragrant way. Imagine walking into battle with 1,000 quacking soldiers at your side, their strategy equal parts pest control and poop. You chuckle, wondering if someone ever tried to give one of these ducks a medal. Historians still argue whether the extraordinary productivity of the Delta is due mainly to human innovation, complex irrigation, dikes, canals and sluices, or whether it was always primarily the gift of nature, the river's sediment, doing the heavy lifting. Some point to ancient Khmer waterworks as evidence of deliberate engineering genius. Others shrug and say the Mekong is simply generous and people just went along for the ride. You paddle through a maze of channels where each bend opens into rice paddies shimmering like glass. Some grains here are short and plump, sticky enough to roll into sweets wrapped in banana leaves. Others are long and slender, their fragrance so delicate it lingers in the air before you even taste it. Families guard seeds like heirlooms, whispering which strain belonged to a grandmother which survived a devastating flood, which yielded enough grain to marry off a daughter. Villages float rather than site houses perched on pontoons tied to trees like obedient pets. From the windows, you see families dropping baskets directly into the water to scoop up breakfast fish. In one corner, you notice clay jars half buried in earth, keeping harvested rice cool and dry, even in the swampy air. These jars are painted with symbols of water birds, guardians of grain, so the villagers say. Harvest season feels like a festival disguised as work. Farmers wade knee-deep in the muck, cutting stalks while singing songs that rise above the rustle of leaves. Piles of rice are stacked in pyramids to dry under the sun, golden mounds guarded by scarecrows dressed in old fishermen's hats. Children chase each other between the bundles, leaving trails of laughter in their wake. You get dragged into a meal where rice is served 6 different ways, and someone insists you eat more, even when you're certain you couldn't possibly. Night falls quickly in the delta, and the horizon disappears into black water, dotted with pinpricks of firelight. Lanterns float in shallow canals like wandering stars, each one marking a family, hoping for safe floods and full harvests. The smell of steaming rice mingles with fried fish and herbs drifting into the warm night air. The sound of frogs croaking forms a strange orchestra, punctuated by the occasional splash of a paddle. You feel yourself sinking into that rhythm, slow and drowsy. Some rice varieties here were bred to withstand saltwater intrusion, a creeping problem in coastal fields, where the sea pushes back against the river. Farmers joke that their rice can handle a little spice, but the struggle is real. Without these hardy grains, entire fields could be ruined. Seeds are exchanged along the river's length, part of an unspoken community network. If your field fails, a neighbor lends you his seed, and someday you return the favor. In the dry season, canals are dredged, dikes repaired, and fields burned to prepare for the next planting. The air smells of smoke, but it's a cleansing fire, not destruction. You imagine the land itself yawning and stretching, readying for another cycle of labor and renewal. Even the ducks look satisfied, waddling off duty as if clocking out from their shift. And always beneath it all, the delta hums with the voice of the river. Silt settles, water shifts, and rice grows grain by grain, stalk by stalk. Forgotten varieties sleep in wooden jars and woven baskets passed hand to hand across generations. Some strains survive only in the memories of elders who speak of them with pride, as if describing lost friends. You drift to sleep with that thought, the quiet pride of a people bound to a grain, a river, and a landscape that refuses to stay still. The delta cradles you like it cradles its rice, patient, fertile, endlessly forgiving. You leave the watery maze of the Mekong Delta and follow the river upstream again, this time slipping into the lands of Laos. The mood changes here. The wide, lazy water of the delta tightens into faster, narrower channels, squeezing past limestone cliffs and forested hills. Villages perch higher up the banks, wary of floods, and rice fields spread in tight terraces like green staircases climbing the slopes. Mainstream fact, Laos has been a land of sticky rice for centuries, so much so that it's considered not just food, but identity. More than 80% of rice consumed here is glutinous, and locals joke that if you haven't eaten sticky rice yet, you haven't actually eaten at all. Sticky rice even appears in religious offerings packed neatly into banana leaf parcels placed at temples. Quirky tidbit. In some mountain villages, farmers once measured wealth not in coins but in bamboo baskets of rice. Forget bank accounts. If you had a tower of steaming baskets stacked in your home, you were the local rice millionaire. Historians still argue whether these rice-based economies truly functioned as stable barter systems, or if they were more symbolic, woven into ritual and reputation rather than strict accounting. Either way, you wouldn't mind seeing Wall Street traders trying to balance portfolios made of sticky rice balls. Here, rice fields hug steep slopes. Terraced paddies hold shining layers of water that mirror the sky like dozens of mirrors arranged in a staircase. Farmers in conical hats move across them, slowly planting seedlings by hand. The work is backbreaking, but there's a rhythm to it, a trance-like calm, broken only by the splash of bare feet and the occasional complaint about leeches. The seeds themselves are precious. Some are small-grain sticky rice meant for pounding into sweets that hold together like chewy bricks. Others are purple-hued strains, their color so deep it looks like twilight pressed into a grain. The taste is nutty, hearty, satisfying, the kind of food you eat once and think about for years afterward. Elders swear by medicinal properties. Eat enough purple rice, they say, and you'll live to see your great-grandchildren. Science hasn't exactly confirmed this, but when you look at some wiry, spry 90-year-olds climbing terraces without breaking a sweat, you start to wonder. You stumble into a harvest ceremony invited by farmers who insist that strangers should never eat alone. Sticky rice is steamed in tall bamboo baskets, the smell rising into the night like a sweet cloud. Meat skewers sizzle, children drum on empty pots, and elders sip rice whiskey that's poured from clay jars with bamboo straws. One sip, and you're convinced this is the original energy drink. Two sips, and you're convinced you can dance like the villagers stomping in time with the drum. Three sips, and you're convinced that the chickens in the corner are judging your moves. The villagers tell stories about guardian spirits who live in the fields, small invisible beings who keep the rice growing strong. You're warned never to mock the spirits or waste a grain, or else the harvest will sulk and shrink next season. To honor them, families leave little offerings: a pinch of rice on a leaf, a few drops of whiskey poured onto the soil. It's a small price for continued abundance, though the whiskey sacrifice feels a little tragic when you've tasted how strong it is. Night falls and the terraces glow under the moonlight, their mirrored waters catching silver beams. Frogs croak, crickets buzz, and the distant laughter of villagers drifts across the hills. You sit cross-legged on a bamboo mat, fingers sticky with rice, watching smoke rise from cooking fires. The warmth of food, the steady rhythm of drums, and the slow hum of the river below wrap around you like a blanket. Scholars debate whether sticky rice farming in Laos developed independently or if it spread from neighboring regions through migration and trade. Some argue the Laotian devotion to sticky rice is cultural rather than agricultural, that the same varieties could thrive elsewhere, but only here did it become sacred. Others suggest the unique soils and climate of these valleys make sticky rice taste different, more fragrant, more memorable, giving rise to its cultural dominance. You weigh both arguments while licking a last stray grain off your finger and think maybe it's both, or maybe it's just delicious enough to inspire lifelong loyalty. As the night deepens, you imagine the rice plants themselves whispering, their stalks swaying gently in the breeze, their grains shimmering with the moon's blessing. Sleep presses close, as sticky as the rice in your hands, binding you to the terraces, the hills, the river's ceaseless voice. You drift further upstream into Cambodia, where the Mekong broadens and twists like a sleepy dragon stretching across the land. The climate grows hotter, heavier, and the river here has a reputation for being both life-giver and trickster. During the monsoon, its waters reverse course, swelling into the Tonle Sap Lake, and then draining back again. Farmers have learned to adapt, bending their lives to the river's mood swings, because when the flood comes, it brings fish, fertile soil, and the chance to plant rice in layers upon layers of wetland. Mainstream fact: Cambodia has cultivated rice for thousands of years, and rice remains the country's staple, woven into language, rituals, and even its proverbs. The ancient temples of Angkor, with their massive stone towers, were supported by an agricultural system that relied heavily on elaborate rice irrigation networks. Archaeologists still marvel at the scale of these hydraulic systems, vast canals and reservoirs that could feed entire populations and armies. Quirky tidbit: in some Cambodian villages, farmers believed that rice grains had souls. Yes, souls like little shimmering spirits that needed care. During harvest, special songs were sung to coax these rice souls back into storage jars so they wouldn't feel abandoned in the fields. You might chuckle, but imagine serenading your pantry with lullabies every night. At least your snacks would never feel lonely. Historians still argue whether the decline of Angkor in the 15th century was due to warfare, climate change, or simply the breakdown of these massive rice irrigation systems. Some claim prolonged droughts weakened the empire's rice production, while others suggest floods washed away the delicate balance. Either way, the story circles back to rice as if the fate of kingdoms rises and falls with the tiny grains that feed them. Walking through Cambodian rice fields, you notice the varieties here differ. Some are short-grain strains perfect for steaming into soft piles, while others are fragrant, long-grain types with a floral aroma. The locals proudly tell you about PHKR maize, Cambodia's prized jasmine rice, considered one of the best in the world. Cooked, it gives off a subtle scent that seems equal parts flower garden and comfort food. You take one bite and think, so this is what all those cooking shows are raving about. As you wander closer to the Tonle Sap, you see floating villages built directly on the water. Houses rise on stilts or bob on rafts tethered by ropes and bamboo poles. Families fish during the floods and plant rice when the waters recede. Children paddle small wooden boats to school as casually as others ride bicycles. It feels surreal, like living inside a hybrid between Venice and a water park, except with more mosquitoes. You're invited to join a harvest feast. The villagers prepare rice wrapped in banana leaves, sticky rice cakes sweetened with palm sugar, and steaming bowls of rice porridge that soothe your tired body. At the center of the gathering sits a massive clay jar of rice wine. The custom, everyone drinks together using long bamboo straws, slurping from the same jar while laughing and telling stories. You take a cautious sip and are hit with a sweet, sour flavor that's surprisingly potent. 2 sips later, you're grinning at strangers like they're long-lost cousins. Elders talk about how each variety of rice has a personality. Some are calm and easy to grow, others temperamental and demanding. One man insists his favorite variety gets grumpy if you plant it on a Wednesday. Another swears his rice grows best if he whistles old songs while weeding. You smile, but deep down you know farmers everywhere talk to their crops, and maybe the plants do listen in some quiet chlorophyll kind of way. As the night deepens, drums and gongs echo across the stilt village. Candles flicker, casting golden light on water that mirrors the stars above. You sit in a boat, rocking gently with a bowl of jasmine rice in your hands. The grains glisten like tiny pearls, the smell rising with the river's mist. The water laps softly, steady as a heartbeat, and the stories of ancient kingdoms and rice spirits drift around you like a lullaby. Sleep presses in again, the kind of drowsiness that feels like floating, your body weightless, carried along by the river, just as the floating villages are carried with the flood. Somewhere you think you hear the rice souls themselves singing, telling you it's safe to rest, that they'll watch over the fields until morning. The Mekong carries you southward into the broad delta of Vietnam, a labyrinth of waterways that splinters and braids into endless channels, like veins feeding the body of a nation. Here, rice paddies stretch as far as your sleepy eyes can see, patchwork mirrors glinting under the tropical sun. Farmers bend in conical hats, their reflections shimmering in the water, hands moving rhythmically as if the land itself were breathing. Mainstream fact: the Mekong Delta is Vietnam's rice bowl, producing more than half the country's total rice and feeding millions, both domestically and abroad. Centuries of farming have created a deep bond between people and grain here, with entire communities timing their lives to planting, transplanting, and harvesting cycles. The lush delta owes its fertility to annual floods that deposit nutrient-rich silt, ensuring fields stay productive year after year. For a quirky tidbit, you learn about floating markets where traders gather in boats heaped with rice fruits and spices. To advertise their goods, they tie samples to long bamboo poles and hoist them high so you can shop just by glancing across the river. Imagine a farmer's market, except everyone's on water, and instead of price tags, you squint at dangling vegetables bobbing in the wind. It's both practical and a little slapstick. You half expect someone to mistake a dangling yam for a fishing lure. Historians still argue whether the intensive rice farming systems here were entirely local innovations or influenced by neighboring Khmer and Cham agricultural techniques. Some point to archaeological evidence suggesting that elaborate canal networks predated major Vietnamese migration into the delta, while others claim the methods evolved independently once settlers adapted to the flooded environment. Either way, what's clear is that rice shaped settlement patterns as much as politics. You follow a farmer into the paddies, wading knee-deep in warm, muddy water. Tiny frogs leap away from your steps and dragonflies hover like living jewels. He explains how the Vietnamese develop varieties of rice suited for multiple harvests a year. Some grow quickly and can be harvested within 3 months, allowing farmers to squeeze 2 or even 3 cycles out of the same field. Efficiency at its finest, though your aching calves disagree as you slog along behind him. At midday, the farmer's family welcomes you into their simple, stilted home. They lay out a meal where every dish predictably involves rice. There's broken rice topped with grilled pork, spring rolls wrapped in rice paper, rice noodles swimming in broth, and even a dessert of sticky rice sweetened with coconut milk. You joke that the only thing missing is rice-flavored toothpaste, and the family laughs politely, though you half suspect someone will actually invent it. You're handed a cup of roux rice wine distilled into a clear, fiery liquid that warms your chest instantly. The host insists on a toast, clinking glasses and reminding you that drinking together is as much about friendship as it is about the wine. Your cheeks flush, and for a moment the endless fields outside blur into golden haze. In the evening, you wander into a festival in a nearby village. Lanterns float on the river, glowing softly as they drift downstream. Children chase each other with sparklers while elders chant prayers for good harvests. The air smells of incense and fried snacks. A troupe performs lion dances, their bright costumes swirling in rhythm with drums while the crowd claps in unison. All around you, rice is celebrated not just as food, but as heritage spirit and symbol of prosperity. One elderly woman tells you that in the old days, families would whisper apologies to the rice if they spilled a single grain. Each grain is a life, she says, and wasting it is like ignoring a gift. Her words stick in your mind long after making you look differently at every grain that clings stubbornly to your bowl. Suddenly, scraping your plate clean doesn't feel like manners, it feels like respect. Night deepens across the delta. Frogs croak, crickets sing, and water laps against the banks. You sit on a small wooden jetty, legs dangling over the water, watching the lanterns disappear one by one. Your head grows heavy, lulled by the hum of insects and the river's gentle pulse. In the stillness, you imagine the rice plants themselves breathing, exhaling the day's heat, whispering promises of tomorrow's harvest. Sleep folds around you like a woven mat, soft and inevitable, and the last thing you taste is the faint sweetness of coconut rice lingering on your tongue. Your journey now drifts beyond the Mekong's fields as barges loaded with rice creak along winding waterways toward bustling ports. You trail behind one, lulled by the steady splash of its paddle wheels. Before long, the muddy channels give way to harbors alive with shouts, gull cries, and the salty smell of the sea. Here, rice no longer stays a humble village staple. It becomes a commodity, bundled, traded, and shipped outward to the wider world. Mainstream fact. For centuries, the Mekong has been one of Southeast Asia's great rice-exporting arteries. By the 19th century, under colonial administrations, enormous volumes of rice were funneled through Saigon and other ports, feeding not just local populations but distant markets across Asia and Europe. Rice became so valuable that French colonial policy transformed entire landscapes into paddy systems designed for export profit. For a quirky tidbit, you overhear merchants comparing notes about rice grading. It's not unlike wine snobs describing tannins, but with grains. Some traders swear they can tell Mekong rice from Chow Phraya rice by smell alone. One insists his nose can detect whether a grain grew in alluvial silt or sandy loam. You suppress a laugh, picturing a reality TV show called The Rice Sommelier, where contestants dramatically sniff handfuls of uncooked grains. Historians still argue whether the surge in rice exports truly benefited local farmers or trapped them in cycles of debt. Some argue that while cash crops opened regional economies, small-scale farmers often lost autonomy, forced into contracts that left them vulnerable to fluctuating global prices. Others point to new irrigation canals and markets as lasting infrastructure. The debate lingers a reminder that progress is rarely evenly distributed. You follow the sacks of rice loaded into wooden ships, their crews sweating as they haul cargo aboard. A captain proudly points to his inventory, boasting that a single voyage could feed entire cities. You lean against a rail watching as sailors cook their own rice meal over a small flame, adding dried fish and chilies. Even while transporting thousands of tons, each man guards his personal ration as though it were treasure. As the ship sets sail, you imagine rice's transformations on its journeys, ending up in royal banquets in China, becoming sticky balls sold on Bangkok streets, or appearing as delicate rice puddings in colonial salons. Each grain carries the story of both the farmer who bent to plant it and the eater who savors it worlds away. Dockside, you pass through markets where middlemen shout prices in a babel of tongues: Vietnamese, Khmer, Chinese, Malay, French, even English. Rice here feels less like food and more like currency, and in truth it sometimes was taxes and debts paid in rice fortunes, rising and falling depending on harvests and trade winds. Later, in a quiet alley, you encounter scribes tallying rice records in ledgers thicker than bricks. One explains that colonial officials tried to measure rice not just by volume, but by calorie yield, calculating exactly how much labor a sack could fuel. It sounds clinical, almost mechanical, turning nourishment into math. Yet behind those numbers, stood families stooping ankle-deep in water, whispering to seedlings under the sun. A merchant offers you a taste of rice crackers, fried fresh in oil, crackling as you bite into them. He grins, telling you that these humble snacks often stowed aboard ships lasting weeks without spoiling. You chew thoughtfully, realizing this crisp little wafer once linked harbors to homes, sailors to farmers, colonies to capitals. As twilight falls, the harbor lights glitter on the water, and the smell of steamed rice mingles with the briny tang of the sea. You imagine the grains packed away in ships' dark holds, awaiting their journeys, each one a silent traveler in a global story. And as gulls wheel overhead, your eyes grow heavy, the creak of ropes and the sway of hulls rocking you into a rhythm that feels suspiciously like a lullaby. You step back inland, drifting through memories of temples and shrines that dot the Mekong basin. Stone towers, wooden pagodas, bamboo spirit houses, they rise from the paddies like guardians, reminding you that rice has always been more than food. It is offering blessing and prayer. You shuffle into a small shrine where a clay pot of freshly cooked rice steams, gently placed as tribute to unseen deities. The air smells faintly sweet, almost buttery, as incense curls upward. Mainstream fact: across Southeast Asia, rice rituals were and remain woven into agricultural calendars. In Laos, the Baun Khao festivals honor both the ancestors and the harvest. In Cambodia, the royal ploughing ceremony, marked by kings, symbolically predicts the year's crop. In Vietnam, offerings of sticky rice often accompanied ancestor veneration. These rituals ensured rice was not merely sustenance, but a sacred bridge between people, land, and spirits. A quirky tidbit catches your ear. In certain Thai villages, farmers once believed rice grains had souls, tiny consciousnesses that could wander off if disrespected. To coax them back, women sang lullabies directly to their baskets of rice, gentle melodies to reassure the grains they were cherished. The thought of rice needing a bedtime song feels oddly perfect for your sleepy journey tonight. Historians still argue whether these rice rituals were primarily spiritual practices or subtle forms of community organization. Some suggest the ceremonies regulated planting cycles, binding entire villages into synchronized labor. Others emphasize their mythic symbolism, embedding respect for fertility and abundance into daily life. The truth likely lives somewhere between, where practical calendars and divine reverence dance together in ritual. As you wander further, you picture monks in saffron robes carrying alms bowls at dawn, villagers gently scooping sticky rice into them with fingers. The grains steam in the cool morning air, each pinch a gift and a prayer. You notice how quiet everyone becomes during the offering, as though even a whisper might jar the delicate exchange between human generosity and monastic blessing. Nearby, you spot an old woman tying strands of rice stalks into a bundle, shaped like a goddess. She explains it is May Fossop, the rice mother protector of harvests. Farmers once bowed to her before cutting fields, asking forgiveness for disturbing her children. You marvel at how deeply the idea of rice being alive permeates belief. Not just crop, not just wealth, an entire personality woven into myth. Later, under moonlight, villagers release floating lanterns down a canal, each carrying a small lump of rice. The glowing lights drift slowly like constellations falling into water. Children giggle as they chase the bobbing sparks, while elders murmur blessings for health and good rains. You feel caught in the soft overlap of sacred and ordinary, where play and prayer mingle effortlessly. You overhear a novice monk mention that in some chronicles, rice was seen as the first cultivated plant after floods receded civilization itself, sprouting from its grains. Whether or not that is historically precise, you can't help but imagine rice as humanity's eternal plus one, tagging along at every banquet, every ritual, every whispered story. A gentle laugh escapes you when you learn about rice ghost stories. Some folktales warn that those who waste rice might be haunted by spirits of hungry ancestors rattling bowls at night. You imagine being scolded not by your parents, but by spectral grandparents floating through walls pointing disapprovingly at the leftovers. Nothing like a supernatural guilt trip to clean your plate. The shrines grow quieter as you stroll away, the night air thick with crickets and the distant croak of frogs. Temples fade behind you, but the scent of steamed rice clings to your clothes, mingling with incense smoke. You realize that for centuries, rice was not just sustenance or trade good. It was a thread tying earth to sky ancestors, to descendants' body to spirit. And as your steps slow, you feel your own thoughts soften as though you too are part of a ritual. A wanderer, honoring the patient grain, whispering goodnight to the fields, carrying their sacred hush into the darkness. You continue your meandering, tracing the Mekong as it unfurls like a silver ribbon toward the sea. Its waters widen slow and dissolve into vast deltas where rice paddies stretch endlessly. Here you sense not only the life of the grain, but also its afterlives, its echoes through memory, cuisine, and forgotten names. The fields shimmer with varieties that once fed entire villages, yet have since vanished from catalogues, replaced by more uniform strains. You stand still, ankle-deep in warm water, imagining the countless footsteps that came before yours. Mainstream fact: the Mekong Delta in Vietnam once hosted thousands of land races of rice, each adapted to microclimates of salinity, flooding, and soil. Farmers exchanged seeds like gifts, ensuring diversity was resilience. Today, many of those land races are gone, casualties of modern hybrid breeding and globalized markets. Yet in quiet corners, a few stubborn families still plant them, clinging to ancestral flavor and pride. A quirky tidbit floats your way. Some elders whisper that certain forgotten varieties could produce rice so fragrant that neighbors claimed they smelled it cooking from a mile away. Others swore certain strains had grains that refused to crack, no matter how long they simmered, perfect for sticky snacks but maddening for impatient cooks. You smile, picturing whole households sighing as they poked at obstinate pots, muttering about unboilable rice. Historians still argue whether this immense diversity arose naturally through centuries of farmer experimentation, or whether deliberate state cultivation projects like those of ancient Khmer rulers played a bigger role. Did peasants gently guiding seeds across generations create the mosaic, or were great irrigation empires the true architects? The answer, like rice itself, seems slippery, shifting with each perspective. You wander through a market at dusk where sticky rice is dyed pink with pandan leaves sculpted into pyramids and wrapped in banana leaves. Children nibble, elders bargain, everyone carries rice in some form. You notice the quiet pride with which sellers explain the differences. This one is softer, this one keeps longer, this one smells like flowers. Forgotten varieties live on here, not just in seed banks, but in tongues and memories. Your steps grow heavier, as if weighed by grains. Each paddled field you recall feels like a chapter, turning one after another, pages of green and gold fading into sepia. The more you remember, the more the world slows, as though the Mekong itself wants to lull you with its rhythm. You think back to the first moment. Remember when you stepped into the upper Mekong valleys where mountain terraces clung to misty slopes. You've followed the river ever since, through trade, an empire, through ritual and story. Always rice by your side, always humming in the background like that fan you hopefully remembered to turn on. Now at the river's mouth you stand at the threshold of sea and sky. Salt mixes with freshwater reeds, bow gently, and boats drift lazily. The horizon feels infinite, a mirror of the endlessness of rice itself. You breathe slowly, letting the humid air fill your chest, then release it like a sigh you've been saving for centuries. The truth settles quietly. The forgotten varieties of rice may never all return, yet their memory lingers. They live in folktales of fragrant pots, in rituals sung to grains with souls, in seed jars hidden in kitchens, and in the stubborn green shoots that refuse to be erased. You realize that memory itself is a kind of cultivation, each story a way of planting again. As your eyes grow heavy, you let the rice fields drift away, dissolving into gentle images, golden stalks swaying water, rippling voices murmuring blessings. The Mekong hums faintly, a lullaby of silt and seed, urging you toward rest. You let yourself follow like a grain carried downstream light, effortless, unresisting. The river slows, and your thoughts slow with it. Each detail that once seemed sharp now softens edges, blurring like mist over water. The fields that stretched endlessly are fading their green, dissolving into dusky twilight. You no longer feel the press of history nor the weight of footsteps across muddy paddies. Instead, there is only the gentle rhythm of breath, yours steady and even mirroring the lull of the Mekong. The hum of cicadas grows faint like a chorus, receding into distance. Even the imagined steam of a pot of rice, warm and fragrant, feels less tangible now. It becomes a memory of a memory drifting somewhere beyond reach, yet not gone. You float on it, suspended without urgency, without effort. The forgotten varieties, the myths, the rituals, all of them ease into silence. They no longer need your attention. They can rest, and so can you. The river carries them gently, carrying you toward a place where no questions press and no debates stir. Even the scholars arguing about irrigation versus farmer ingenuity have grown tired, their voices trailing off mid-sentence. What remains is quiet. The soft splash of water meeting shore. The feel of night air cooling against your skin. The faint hum, steady and constant like a lullaby, with no beginning and no end. You are safe here, safe in the hush of the delta, safe within the rhythm of a story that has carried you this far and now sets you down. Breathe once more deeply. Let it go. The world is vast, the river endless, the rice eternal. And for now, your only task is to sleep.